Thank you, everyone, for joining. Elizabeth, Jesse the Great, Gary, thank you so much. Hi, Bob. Good to see you. Thanks for joining, Bob. Tom, thanks for joining. Really appreciate that. Thank you, everyone. Hi, Dave from California. Good to see you again. Thanks for coming. Glad you got my message that I was here. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining. I thought I'd do a Substack live. Hey, Bob, good to see you again, Bob. Thanks for coming back. I was going to do my usual um, outsiders with Melissa A. Moore, but we couldn't do it this week, so we're going to do it in next week. So sorry about that if you enjoy that. So today I'm going to talk about a few things. One of the things I wanted to talk about is the midterms and how the midterms because we're starting to see a lot of sort of in America, you start to see a lot of elections in coming up, and there's a lot of conversation at the moment around the Senate, and obviously for the Democrats to pick up the Senate, it would be really good for them to pick up Maine. The problem with Maine is that one of the candidates, Graham Platner, is quite controversial. Now, I know there's a lot of people out there who like that, they don't particularly care that is controversial. It's not a big deal and stuff like that. But I think one of the things that we are noticing in politics in America, and actually, to be honest with you, around the world, is that I wrote an article about this just this week, and that is that people tolerance levels um, for scandal is much higher now. Like you know, when I first got into American politics, I would say what radicalized me into American politics, and I think it happened to a lot of people like me, like from Australia or the UK or Europe, was the war in Iraq. That was the thing that kind of got us interested in American politics because it affected the whole world. So, for example, the war in Afghanistan, Australian soldiers went there. There was a lot. It was at NATO. It was all NATO troops. So it affected the whole world. So from that point of view, I think for me and a lot of other people, they were radicalized by George W. Bush and what he was doing in the war in Iraq. And that was like obviously 2003. Hi, Kimmy. Thank you so much for joining, Kimmy. And what happened after that is the next elections, or the next primary elections you had in America was 2004. And that was the first time I was really involved in American politics and I was watching it. Hi, Joe Pratt. And the person that I was following the most was Howard Dean. And of course, many of you probably, I'm on the fence with Platner, but there seems to be more noise about him than any other. Yeah. Look, I agree, Bob, but I want to do like a little bit of a deep dive into not just Platner himself, but why Platner, there is something going on, right? Because this isn't just about, the thing with me is I think it's not just about Trump and it's not just about Platner. And I think there's a bigger thing going on, and it's not just in America, but it's interesting because it means that what's happening is that it's going to open the field for different types of candidates. So going back to 2004, the person that I liked the most in 2004 was a Democrat by the name of Howard Dean. And most people in America would know who Howard Dean was. Now, he was winning in the primary, right? Hi, me. Good to see you. I'm not sure if that's Sandra or not. So in the primaries, hi, is that you, Sandra? Is that you? I don't know. It's a different photo now. It's hard to tell. It's hard to tell. Sandra's very mysterious these days. Sometimes she'll have different photos all the time. It's hard to keep up with. Donna, thank you so much for joining. And in 2004, it is, it's felt a little exposed. Oh, okay, good. Yeah, that's a nice picture. And so back to 2004, um, we had Howard Dean winning. And then at the end of one of his rallies, he does this scream or like a screech, right? And it wasn't even that bad. He just like, his voice elevated, right? And anyway, it became like 24/7 news because It was like, what was that strange screech that he did, right? Hi, Donna, it's here. How are you, Joe? Thanks, Donna. I'm doing well. Thank you so much for coming. And and then that became 24/7 news because he elevated his voice. And that was like, and then within a couple of weeks, he dropped out. It's crazy to think that someone who was coming first in a primary had to drop out because he elevated his voice. That scream lost him. Yeah, that's right. But Bob, if you think how did it sound? Oh, I couldn't do it. Go on YouTube. Unbelievable. Go on YouTube and you can see the screen. It's pretty amazing. Um, and so it is unbelievable, Dave, to think that that's like we've gone from that, and then you go to 2016, right? We have the Access Hollywood tape, right? So, about grab him by the thing, whatever. He had accusations, Trump had accusations against him by multiple women, right? He called John McCain. He says, about John McCain, he said, I prefer my war heroes who were not captured. So there's Access Hollywood tape, right? You've got saying that John McCain wasn't a war hero. You've got the multiple accusations against him, and then you compare that to someone elevating their voice. Now, Trump doesn't resign. He doesn't apologize, right? He just goes fake news and moves on. So something happened, right? Something happened between 2004 when a Democrat resigns over the most ridiculous thing, and then Donald Trump does these crazy like sexual assault, all this sort of stuff, and becomes more popular. And I think what happened is a couple of things. One is the war in Iraq became a lot more unpopular as time went by, because remember that was 2004. I think social media was another thing that happened. I think, oh my God, the root is that he passed away. He has not been. Yeah, I think they saw him today. I don't think he's passed away. Um, and so, yeah, so basically, so Donald Trump is basically gets into power. And I think part of that is also because I think Trump was very different in some ways. And I think he was different because everyone already knew who Trump was. Trump wasn't a politician, right? He already had this background of being like a reality TV guy. The cowardly media has always been tough on the Democrats because they know that they aren't going to threaten them or tear them to shreds. They're chicken shit. Yeah, Republicans. Yeah, exactly, Bob. Now, I will say that I think what happened is that Democrats to hold themselves more accountable for when they do things, and Trump showed people that by ignoring that, by not holding yourself accountable, by not apologizing, you can actually get away with more. And it's actually probably true. It's not a good thing to do. It's not a good thing to do, but Trump has shown the worst sides of human beings. And it's easy to say Trump, 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 but Trump can only do these things if people let it happen. Trump didn't get elected. Trump was elected because people voted for him. So Trump is a symptom of things that are already going on. So just saying it's Trump doesn't really give you the complete picture, because Trump can't exist in a vacuum. Trump can only exist because he's in the right conditions where enough people will vote for him, right? And so something has to happen outside of Trump. It's one thing to be like a charismatic figure or anything like that, but there have to be the right conditions outside of that for him to be successful at what he does. And I think Trump realized a couple of things. One is people already had low expectations of Trump before he got into power because he wasn't like a politician like type person. Trump in his past had owned like a beauty pageant. He boasted about sleeping with a lot of women. He would go on like different shows and talk about, sexual stuff with women. He was doing all this stuff before he became a politician. So the Access Hollywood tape wasn't as effective because people already knew Trump was already like that. And so, in a sense, he was inoculated from that stuff because he wasn't. But you compare that to a politician. Politicians will often come in and try to be like, we not to say that they're perfect, but they're very. A lot of politicians, especially in the past, right, they were vetted. Politicians were vetted all the time. They would have people within their party who would vet them. They'd ask them questions. So, did this happen when you were younger? Did that happen when you were younger? Has this ever happened to you? So, the politicians who would sometimes go to the top were generally politicians who thought they were already vetted. What Trump showed, what Trump showed is that you can. What Trump showed is that it doesn't that the public, to some degree, doesn't care as much as the political parties think they did, right? And in a sense, Trump showed that that being the way he was, which was someone who was like, sleeping around with people, and it doesn't say much for the people that accused of his behavior. They're just as bad people that, yeah, exactly, exactly. And the thing is that Trump showed that people care less about that stuff than people realized. And people cared less about that stuff than even the political parties realized, right? But there were signs that that was the case. Um, in the 90s, you had Bill Clinton and Lewinsky, right? That was big news. The Republicans impeached him, but when they impeached him, he became more popular. So there was already something there back in the 90s, right, where impeaching Bill Clinton over something that happened in his private life actually made him more popular. So there was already bits and pieces there of what I think Trump understood that. And he understood that people, as to some degree, they dismiss um, what happens in people's personal life. They often say, like, for example, if someone's accused of sexual assault, they will say, "Oh, they're just trying to get money." They're just trying to get money off them. That's what. And so it's very easy for people to make excuses for someone, right? When there was I think it was Eric Solwell. I can't remember his name now. Eric Solwell, the Californian candidate, right? When he first came out, there was accusations against him. Even people on the left were like, "Oh, well, they're just doing it. They're just doing it because they're trying to get him." So you can easily make excuses for why people are being accused of sexual harassment on both the left and the right. So I don't think that was ever going to be a deal breaker. I mean, going back to the 60s, John F. Kennedy, right? John F. Kennedy, it was an open secret in the media that John F. Kennedy was sleeping around. Everyone in the media knew that he was sleeping around. Most people didn't care back then because they said journalists would say the private life of a politician is just that, a private life. Um, so for that reason, they left it alone. So then you fast forward to Graham Platner, right? And I think Graham Platner, even before Graham Platner, Ken Paxton. And I know there's a whole bunch of other people in there, like Andrew Cuomo. There's a whole bunch of other people in there. But then you go fast forward to Ken Paxton. Now, Ken Paxton has been accused of corruption. He's been accused of cheating by his wife. So he's had all these accusations against him. Now, the best thing that Trump did for Ken Paxton wasn't just endorsing him, because it's possible Ken Paxton would have won even without the endorsement. The best thing that Trump did for Ken Paxton is that he lowered the bar for people being accused of corruption. Trump has been accused of corruption for so many years, it's almost been normalized, right? Even back before he was a politician, remember he had Trump University? Remember Trump University, which wasn't actually a university, and the judge said that it was a scam, so therefore he closed it down, right? So even back before he was a politician, he was accused of like fraud and scam. So it's been such an ongoing thing that people kind of become immune to it. And so Ken Paxton, in a way, Ken Paxton, in a way, that was the best thing that Trump did for him. the best thing that Trump did for him is make accusations of fraud and make accusations of corruption such a common thing that people don't pay attention to it anymore. And that was Trump's biggest gift to Ken Paxton. He normalized corruption, and so no one took notice of it. The other thing he was accused of is cheating on his wife. Well, we already know that cheating on your wife is definitely not a deal breaker, no matter where it is, because so from Bill Clinton to to anybody, it's not never going to be a deal breaker because a lot of people believe that's between himself and his partner. Yeah, Bob, it still takes Pluto's vote in Texas to get Paxton voted in. Exactly. Yeah. So now you fast forward to Graham Platner. So Graham Platner, the difference is he's a Democrat. Now, in the past, someone like Graham Platner, being a Democrat, they would hold themselves to a higher standard and they would see what's happened to Ken Paxton. They would see what happened to Donald Trump and they'd go, you know what? I'm going to resign. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. Right. So a lot of people would resign. In the old days, a lot of Democrats would have resigned or they would have apologized and then resigned because that was kind of the Democratic thing. The other person, remember, was Al Franken. Al Franken was in the Senate. He was a comedian who turned politician. And after Trump was elected in 2017, there was a photo. Some people came up with an old photo that he did, I think, from 2006 when he was going to Iraq. And on that plane, he was on the back of the plane. There was a reporter who was wearing like a jumpsuit, and she was asleep. And he took a photo of pretending to grab her breast. I don't think he was, and then laughing to the camera. And from that, Al Franken resigned, right? Even though it was supposed to be a joke. Now, she was offended by it. But again, if that would have been a Republican, they would have said, look, it was a joke. I didn't mean it. They would definitely not have resigned. So again, it just shows that Democrats in the past held themselves to higher standards than Republicans did. But I think what Democrats have realized is because Donald Trump got elected twice. He got elected twice. And the second time, he was elected after trying to overthrow the government, right? So people realized it doesn't matter if you hold yourself to a higher standard because the public doesn't care that much anymore. And therefore, what's the point of Democrats resigning all the time because something has come up, Ty Zilton, because they've done something wrong or whatever, because they will still vote in. I think if the George W. Bush had affairs with presidents. Yeah, right. Yeah. Well, the other thing is, like look at, yeah, that's true. That's true. Thanks, Harvey, for joining. You look at George W. Bush, right? Look at George W. Bush, his son, George H. Bush's son. I don't think there's been any accusations of George W. Bush cheating on his wife or sexual assault. As far as I know, I don't think there has been, right? I think there's like drug stuff, but that's about it, right? And even that can get turned into a positive by saying, I'm a born again Christian, and people love that, right? But anyway, so George W. Bush hasn't been accused of anything, right? Now you have Graham Platner, who's had a tattoo, right, for too many years. This is my biggest problem with Graham Platner. It's not the texting other women. It's not the Reddit stuff that he said, even that was pretty bad. It's the tattoo. Now, the reason I think the tattoo's so bad is because it was on there for so long. It was on there for a very, very long time. Now, I get that he was a Marine and I get that Marines do stupid stuff, right? I also get that he went to Iraq and people who go to Iraq and come back can stuff up their brains, right? So I understand to some degree why he went on this sort of this area. Now, the downside, obviously, most Democrats, including myself, like if I was American, or centre-left people or left-wing people, would say if we had another option, we would go. Hi, Mary, thanks for joining. If we had another option, we would go with someone else. The problem is that Janet. The problem is that Janet Mills. Hi, Mary. That Janet Mills, who's the other option, is not as popular in Maine. Is not. Thank you for adding on the E. Yeah, thank you. Is not as popular as Graham Platner is. So if he pulls out and she goes in, they could lose the Senate. And the Senate is so close that they really do need Maine. The Democrats need Maine to get the Senate if they've got any chance. I still do think that the Senate is a long shot. I actually do believe that, but they do have a chance. Sandra, now I'm just realizing the beer looks nice. I agree about the beer. Thank you. Looks nice. I agree about Graham Platner. No way would I vote for him if I lived in Maine. No way. Yeah, exactly, exactly. Yeah, um, exactly, Sandra. I agree. Lots of bad spelling, huh? I understand that, Sandra. The spelling doesn't. Yeah, it doesn't. We're trying to type really fast. Um, yeah, I look. I think the problem with Graham Platner is that if you're a Democrat and you say like trying to be like trying to be fair here, right? If you're a Democrat and you've been going around saying Trump is a fascist, Trump is this, Trump is that, Trump is this, Trump is that, and then you support Graham Platner, it does take away a little bit of credibility, right? It does take a bit of your credibility away because yes, you can say, well, they did it and stuff like that, but then it becomes more like, okay, so we're throwing character out the window. No longer matters whether you're left or right or whatever, and then therefore it's just about that. Now, maybe, 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 like I think about this. This is the other side to it. The other argument to it is you have George W. Bush, who never cheated on his wife, as far as we know, never had any accusations against him, right? And yet he sent America into a war in Iraq, and he sent Graham Platner into a war in Iraq as well, right? So who would I prefer? Would I prefer Graham Platner, who has this like past, which isn't very nice, right? Um, or would I prefer George W. Bush, who maybe treats his wife better, but is sending America into Iraq? I mean, that's the kind of options I feel. Sorry, we need to get rid of Susan Collins. How many other politicians have these issues? Yeah. Look, Mary, I will say the the thing about Graham Plattner is not the cheating. It's not the sexting. I don't think people really care about that stuff anymore. And I don't. The Reddit posts aren't great because he did actually make racist comments about black people and stuff. But okay, maybe people can suffer terrible. Yeah, exactly. Look, I agree, Mary. He had PTSD. He went to Iraq. He was, he changed. Um, but it does. You can't get away from the fact that you can't get away from the fact that it does it does make Democrats not as credible anymore when it comes to character, right? You have to at least admit that. You have to at least admit that this is going to make us that we have less to come back with. Because if you say, well, Trump did this and Trump did that, it's like, yeah, your candidate had a tattoo of a Nazi symbol for 20 years. And it's like I'm not saying I would. I don't know if I would vote for him if I was in Maine. I actually don't know because I can see reasons why I would vote for him, and I can see reasons why I wouldn't vote for him. But I certainly can't see like it's not all one way, right? You are Democrats. Republicans will use this against Democrats whenever they accuse Trump of fascism, whenever they accuse Trump of being this or being that or whatever. They will have ammunition. Could be they will have ammunition to come back and go like that. It feels like we trust these types of people. We're going to be civilian. Yeah. Look, I actually I think there's another thing that's going on here, right? And I do agree, Mary, if it means if this is I agree with Mary to some degree because if we had no chance, if Democrats had no chance of winning the Senate at all, they had no chance, I would probably say forget Graham Plattner. I would say don't put him in there and go with Janet Mills because it wouldn't be worth it. The only reason I'm open to Graham Platner at all is because his vote, his win, might be the actual might actually make the Democrats control the Senate. That's how close it is, right? But if Democrats were going to win by 10 or they were going to lose by 10, I would be against Graham Platner running because I think the damage he would do to the Democratic name would be worse than one thing that didn't make a difference either way. I get it. It's just unfortunate. Yeah. And look, I don't know, like Janet Mills, who's the other person. The problem with the Democrats need to focus on the corruption affordability, safer interest. Yeah. Look, Bob, I 100% agree with you. But I 100% agree with you. Yeah. Yeah. And that's the thing that, this is the thing. If you just, once you bring Graham Platner into the Democratic Party, attacks on Trump's personal life aren't going to work anymore. They're just not going to work anymore because every time you say Trump cheated on his wife or Trump did this or Trump did that or Trump posted this horrible thing, we're not going to have this. It's going to be harder to say that because they're going to go, what about Graham Platner? And you're going to go, oh, yeah. And if you're a Democrat, you might be able to believe that. But for independents, they're going to go, well, you're both as bad as each other. And that's what happens with independents. Independents often will say, I think both the Democrats and Republicans are as bad as each other. And when something like this happens with Graham Platner, that can reinforce in the independent's mind that there's Trump is bad, but how can they think Graham Plattner's okay? Why are they still voting for you? So it will definitely have an impact. But I think Bob is right, is that you concentrate on affordability. And I think the biggest plus for the biggest plus for Graham Platner is that he does talk a lot about affordability, and he does talk a lot like he's kind of in the Bernie Sanders wing of the party, and I think some of the criticisms of Graham Platner, right? I don't disagree. Stay away from Trump's character. Everyone already knows he has none. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. So I the other thing is, I think some of the criticism coming from his partner does a Nixon checkers speech. Yeah, has Plattner done. I don't know. I don't know if he has, Dave. I'm not sure if he has. I mean, I think Plattner's best thing is, I think Plattner's best thing is not to try to deny what he's done, is to actually admit what he's done, and say that he's changed. That's the biggest thing. I've done stupid stuff, but I've changed, right? Because with Trump never admits he's done anything wrong. So there can be like a point of difference. And the point of difference can be Graham Plattner acknowledges he's done something wrong, but has changed. Trump never acknowledges he does anything wrong, therefore he can't change. I think that could be a point of difference. But I think the biggest point of difference is concentrating on affordability. Because I think what's happening is people are less and less. If you look at the inmate, he says he's changed, but more stuff comes out. Exactly. Look, exactly, Sandra. And that's the other thing. We don't know what else is going to come out. And that's the other thing. What if more and more at what level, where is the red line, right? Where is the red line in the Democrats? There's got to be a red line. Now, I'm not sure if Graham Plattner's gone there, but he's certainly gone close. The video his wife did was heartbreaking. They're struggling with it. Yeah, exactly. And look, Mary, I've got to say, the stuff about cheating on his wife or whatever, that's none of my business. If that's all it was, I wouldn't care. Not that I wouldn't care, but people's personal life or relationships are very complicated. They're not, most people's marriages aren't like a movie, right? They're not like a Hollywood movie, right? They're usually more complicated than that. Real life is more complicated than a Hollywood movie. So I think people understand when it's someone's personal life or someone sending text message, whatever. I think people understand. I think where Graham went further than that is the Nazi tattoo and some of the Reddit stuff that he did, which was obviously racist stuff, right? Now, again, so I don't think the cheating on his wife thing or sexting, whatever it was, I don't think that's the issue at all. I think if that's all it was, no one would even care. But it's just like one thing after another. It's compounded. And then what happens is nobody wants to hear what you want to say about cost of living. No one wants to hear what you say about healthcare because they're so focused on your scandals. And that could be a problem, right? Because if he's trying to push across, if you have someone who's so damaged that all anyone wants to do is concentrate on what they still voted Clarence Thomas in with all the gross sexual harassment. Yeah, that's true. That's true. Yeah. Yeah. Look, I just think that I think the difference is that generally Democrats put themselves higher than Republicans in terms of character. That's all I'm saying. They put themselves higher in and I think by getting behind Platner, it's goes so far as I say, if you dig deep enough, you can find it. Exactly. Yeah. And look, I think Platner has more dirt than most people. I do think Platner has more dirt. I've never had a Nazi tattoo. I do have a tattoo. I do have, and by the way, I do have a little bit of sympathy towards his tattoo. I don't have a Nazi tattoo, but I do actually have a small little tattoo here, just here on my chest, a small little tattoo. And I got the tattoo when I was, I think, 23 years of age. And a friend of mine, she wanted to get a tattoo, right? Can we see? Yeah, I'll show you in a second because I want to tell you the story first before I show you. And I was 21, 22. It was like three or four of us, and we'd been out drinking. And a friend of mine, it was a female, and she said, "I want to go get a tattoo." And so we all went to a tattoo parlor like at 1 a.m, right? And she got a tattoo, like a pretty decent one. Like I can't remember. It was like I think back in the 90s, it was like those Asian writing. That was kind of trendy at the time, like Chinese writing. It was like something like that. Anyway, we were waiting, and one of the tattoo artists came up and said, "Hey, while you're waiting, why don't you guys get one of these small ones here, and I'll give you a good price. I'll give you a good deal." And we went, "Okay." So we all got small ones, and I looked up, and I was looking at these I think it's Greek mythology ones, like from Greece, and I saw one. I thought, "Oh, that looks pretty cool," but I had no idea what it means. I had no idea what it meant. I just thought it looked good, so I got it. And then about 6 months afterwards, I was like, didn't have my top on, and someone noticed it, and she said, "Oh, that's an ankh." And I went, "Oh, is it?" She goes, "Yeah, it means female fertility." So I got a tattoo that its meaning is female fertility. I have no idea. And so I'll show you. It's basically, can you see that? Um, Wait a sec, where is it? Oh, there it is. Yeah, there it is. It's like a cross, like a cross. Yeah, female. Yeah. So it means female fertility. It's called an ankh. So yeah, so I mean, I had no idea. I was 21 years of age, and I just, I, oh yeah, I got female fertility. I was 21 years of age. I had no idea. I still don't really know that much about it. I imagine exactly. Yeah. Now it wasn't a Nazi tattoo. Okay, it was just female fertility. But I can see how people can, go into a tattoo parlor. Graham Platinum was in the military. He was with no, it means forever or something. Really? No, I think it does mean female fertility, something to do with female. Oh, okay. I thought it meant female fertility. I'll have to double check. I'm pretty sure I've checked it. Um, but yeah. Um, but anyway, like it didn't mean what I had no idea. So I got something that I had no idea what it meant. Um, so hi Paulo, thanks for joining, Paulo. So again, I think it shows that, young people can do stupid stuff. He was in the Marines, right? He was with a group of people who was in Germany, I think, and they all got tattoos. Now, if you were to say, hi, Paul, when I first saw Graham Plattner's tattoo, I didn't know what it meant. Hi, mate. I had no idea what it meant. I had no idea that was and apparently, um, do we know the circumstances surrounding Platner getting his Nazi tattoo? Maybe he was drunk or whacked out drugs. Who knows? Just need to strip into it and face it. Yeah, eternal life, is that what it means? Eternal life. I thought it meant fertility. I thought it meant fertility, or maybe eternal life is kind of to do with fertility. I don't know. I think it does have something to do with fertility, eternal life. Yeah. 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 So eternal life, fertility, that sort of stuff. Yeah. Because when I did Google it once, it did say fertility, like something to do with female fertility. And I'm all for female fertility. I've never been against it in any way. So I'm not, it's not that I'm ashamed of it. It's just that if I was I don't know if I was at a tattoo parlor and a tattooer said that's female fertility, that I would have got that particular tattoo. Although I still like the look of it. It looks pretty cool. I like it. But yeah, so it just goes to show Graham Plattner, I believe Graham Plattner was in Germany. He was with some friends. He was in the Marines. He was with some friends, right, in the Marines. And he was with some friends in the Marines, and they all went out to a tattoo parlor and got it. The other thing is, I believe that the Marines actually check your tattoos to make sure you don't. Thank you, Dave. Check the tattoos to make sure you don't have anything suspicious, and they checked it, and no one said anything about it. But again, I would just say the fact that you have a Nazi tattoo for 20 years, it's something. It's like, I think with some things, right, you can't talk your way out of it. You know what I mean? I just want to know where all the boring vanilla politicians are. Well, exactly. But you know what? The boring, the boring vanilla politicians are probably the Chuck Schumers, the Hakeem Jeffries, right? They're all the moderates. Like, I would think most of them are like the moderates. The Kamala Harris, that's what I had to say it, but when I was young and got tipsy, I did some silly things. Yeah, so did I. So did I, Mary. And I'm in the pockets of corporation. Yeah. Yeah. So I think it is. I think part of what it is that people who have more progressive ideas, more left wing ideas, have probably lived a more wild life. I think it's fair to say, on average, that people who've been like more progressive have probably lived a more, I don't know, maybe experimented with drugs more, maybe went around politics a little bit. You know what I mean? As where people who are moderates, like Chuck Schumer or Hakeem Jeffries or Joe Biden or all those type of Kamala Harris, these are people who are kind of middle of the road people. I like the boring ones. I don't want politicians to consume it. Yeah, look, I agree. And look, I agree. It would be good to have a Graham Plattner who's with some of Graham Plattner's policies without all the baggage. Because what happens is all the focus becomes about the baggage and not about the policies. And I think that can be a problem. In Australia, a lot of politicians will step aside, and they will step aside by saying, I don't want to be a distraction for my party, right? This is what they'll say. They won't admit to doing anything wrong, or they might say it's been taken out of, they might say, look, I think this has been taken out of context, whatever. However, because there's so much focus by the media on this, it's distracting. It's distracting my political party from doing good things because the media is. So therefore, I'm resigning. So they do it on behalf of the party. In Australia, I feel like it's more of the political parties are more like collective. They more like will look out for each other, where they will take, they'll take a bullet for the rest of the party. Bill Clinton came back with a high approval rate. That's true. That's true, Merrick. But it wasn't a Nazi tattoo. And that's the thing, Merrick. Like, I think when it comes to cheating, when it comes to sexting, when it comes to people having affairs, I think most people don't care about that stuff. Or if they do care about it, it's not the number one issue. And the reason is because in normal life, 50% of marriages don't work. Let's just be honest. Like, I just recently, I had a couple friend of mine who everyone thought they were the perfect couple. Everyone thought they was like the perfect, and then they both came out recently and said they're getting divorced. And we're like, what? You guys? And then both of them were like afterwards, like when you talk to them separately, oh no, it's been bad for like a very, very long time. And we're like, what? What? Like that. So I don't know what's going on in people's private life. I don't really care. I don't, infidelity, whatever, that's between them two. And I think most people think like that. But again, I think it's not that that's getting Graham Platner in trouble. It's the Nazi tattoo and the stuff that he said on Reddit. He might have been very drunk. He might have been, but it doesn't change the fact that he had this tattoo for 20 years. That's a long time, 20 years. And there are some people, I don't know if this is true, who have said that he did know it was a Nazi tattoo, but because he wasn't going to run for office, he thought it was funny. He didn't actually think, he might not have known about it at the start, but he might have found out about it and then he thought it was just like a joke. And therefore, but he's not going to run for office, so what's the point of it? It was like a joke thing. Um, so it's possible that can happen as well. But at the end of the day, it goes back to like Mary in Australia, as you probably know, sometimes a politician will take one for the team and say, look, I'm distracted. Because of what happened, my scandal, my private scandal, I'm distracting. I'm being a distraction for our whole political party. Therefore, I'm going to resign to take the pressure off my party. So I guess in the case of Graham Platner is if you replace him with Janet Mills, I don't think Janet Mills is going to win. I don't think because I looked at the polling and most of the people in Maine want Graham Platner. They don't want Janet Mills. So if he does step aside, they probably won't win that seat. And that seat might have been the seat that wins them the Senate. So it's very complicated in that area. As I said, if the Democrats were going to win the Senate by 10 seats or lose by 10 seats, I think it would be better for Graham Platner not to go, in my opinion, just because he brings this new dimension into the party. And that's why she's considered an establishment Democrat. Yeah. Unfortunately, Democrats are a distraction to the Democrats. Yeah. Yeah. And look, I think you have to I think you have to. There's got to be better progressive still in the burn. I still think we still got to. I think Democrats do need to find progressive people with progressive policies who don't have some. Again, I don't care about the cheating stuff or having affairs. I think we can all. I think most people, Republican, Independents, that's not going to be a deal breaker. But the other stuff can be a deal breaker, right? So I don't. The weird thing is, I don't think accusations of sexual harassment are even a deal breaker. I guess it depends on the severity of it. Like if it's someone just being like an old, like handsy dude. But with Eric Solwell, I felt like it went way further than that. Therefore, that's why he had to like step aside. So again, it depends on the thing, but yeah, it's a strange thing that I think unfortunately Democrat. Yeah, I think times have changed. There's no longer the same benchmark for scandals. People, as I said, corruption is not going to get you kicked out. Cheating on your wife or husband is not going to get you kicked out. Sexual harassment, as long as it's not extra, like if it's just like so with Andrew Cuomo, I feel like a lot of the sexual harassment stuff was him making inappropriate jokes. That's like old man type of sexual harassment. I think people will let you get away with that stuff. But if it's, yeah, but I think, and also with Donald Trump, I feel he can get away with more than other people can, only because he tries to make it out like it's a witch hunt and all this sort of stuff. But yeah, so I think the landscape has changed dramatically. I think the landscape has changed dramatically. And I guess it becomes about like what Bob said earlier, is that you focus on cost of living and you focus on that sort of stuff. All that stuff should be a deal. All that stuff should be, yeah. So cost of living is the main thing. The problem with Graham Platner, as I said before, is if if people are so focused on his scandals and lose sight of what he's saying about policy, that could be a problem. And I think also some of the people who are criticizing Graham Platner are criticizing, and I'm talking about, for example, never Trumpers, people who were Republicans, people who might have been pro Trump and then became anti Trump, right? And then I think, and a lot of those people, they hate Donald Trump, right? But they still hold Republican views on economics, right, and healthcare and stuff like. There's still more right wing when it comes to policies. They just don't like Donald Trump, right? They would, they would have liked, for example, you know, Romney, or they would have liked John McCain or someone like that, more establishment topic, or Marco Rubio before he became a MAGA person. Let's right now we just need candidates who can work. Yeah, so I think I'll go into that. Yeah, so so I think some of those people, they don't like Graham Platinum. It's partly character, but it's also partly because Graham Platinum is very progressive. He's also calls out Israel a lot, and a lot of these people who are um, anti-Trump, they are very pro-Israel, right? So I think there's more going on here than just because let me say this: if Graham Platinum was a moderate, let's just say Graham Platinum was a moderate in terms of policy. He's like Kamala Harris in policy, right? Just centre left or centrist policies, right? Do people, do the never Trumpers, do they go after Graham Platinum as hard as they're going after him? I don't know. I actually don't know the answer to that. I don't know that because I definitely know that a lot of the never Trumpers don't like his views on Israel and they don't like his economic policies because never Trumpers, they're still Republicans. They're still, I don't think, I don't like him. I'm a liberal for always been a centre left. Yeah, I agree, Sandra. I'm just thinking more like the people who were Republicans, never Trumpers, and then they've become and they've become Democrat. Yeah, they become uh, Democrats, but they're only Democrats because they hate Trump. They're not Democrats because they like democratic policies on that sort of stuff. So so again, I think yes, there's some criticism of the never Trumpers on his character, but I do think part of it is because he's very progressive, like he's from the Bernie Sanders side, and he criticizes Israel. So I think those two things. I think if he was very moderate and very pro-Israel, I think it's possible that they wouldn't go after him as hard. That's just my opinion. Yeah. Um, but yeah, going to 2028. Let's talk policy between right now. We just need candidates who can win. Yeah. I think policy for 2028, I think a big housing policy would be good. A big healthcare policy would be good. But I do think, Bob, you still have to have the right candidates. Candidates can make such a big difference in the midterms and elections, And I think so you got to have the right, yeah, healthcare. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think healthcare needs to be a big one. Healthcare needs to be a big one. Building homes, I think, is a really good one as well. I've always said that. I thought building homes was a big one because there is a shortage of homes in America, and I think building homes could be a really big, good policy to do. But yeah, I think from those point of views, but you want to have the right candidate giving that message. I don't know. For me, we need universal healthcare for sure. That's top of my list. Yeah, yeah. So, or even like a public option, because in Australia and Europe and Scandinavia, we don't really have universal healthcare in the way that Bernie Sanders says it. I just don't think policy is going to be a big factor this year. Um, I actually disagree, Bob. I actually disagree. I think, I think, I think in the Democratic Party, it's not a big factor because the Democratic Party is about hating Trump. right? Hating Trump is the biggest thing that motivates Democratic voters. However, you need the independents to win. And independents don't really care about whether Trump is a nice person or a bad person because they voted for him twice, right? And they voted for him based on economics. Both, both, the last election, all the polling showed that the number one reason people voted for Trump wasn't based because they thought he was a nice guy or anything. It was based on the fact that they thought that he could bring down inflation and he could bring down cost of living. That were the number one reasons, right? So I think I think the Democrats in 2024 spent too much time thinking about Donald Trump, which was good to get the base voting for him. But most independents are sick of all the shit. They are, but they're sick of all the shit. But they are, Bob. But they're sick of all the shit because the economy wasn't fixed or fixed up. If they thought the economy was better, they don't give a shit about the other shit. The people will hold their nose if they feel someone can do better for them economically, right? I don't think a lot of these independents thought Trump was great in 2024, but they would say things like, "I'm not a big fan of Trump, but we need to get cost of living under control." So they're sick of all the shit because the economy did not get better; it got worse. And then once someone lied to you about the economy, your cost of living, then you start looking for other reasons to hate the person. He's the slush fund. He's corrupt. All this sort of stuff. That gets that you then start. It's like when you're in like a long term marriage or something. I don't know. Like just thinking of something, and suddenly, at the start, it's all like, oh my god, it's beautiful, and then you might find like one or two things that annoy you at the start, and now suddenly they become bigger problems. I think the big thing is the economy. I think the biggest thing is the economy, and then from that once they start once because they didn't want to say I won't vote for a woman. Yeah, look, I think ultimately people don't get elected over racism. I know that there's going to be people disagreeing with me. I don't think it had anything to do with, I don't think they're the main focus. I don't think racism, gender, I don't think they were the main reasons. I think the main reason was the economy. And inflation was high in 2024. It was coming down, but it's high. I think, I think Trump, they took a gamble with Trump. They rolled the dice and they took a gamble with Trump, right? Because he convinced a lot of people that he's this great businessman. I know it's all lies, but if you want to believe this stuff, now remember, a lot of independents don't follow politics very closely. A lot of independents are not on Substack or Twitter or whatever. They're just getting a little bit of information here and there. So they will base a lot racism on libel. It is, but I don't think racism will be a factor for not getting someone voted in or not getting someone voted out. I don't think that's the number one factor. I think the economy, if you look at every election in America, the economy is absolutely the biggest issue why people vote by a million miles. And especially those low information voters. In America, you have a lot more low information voters. Low information voters are people who don't follow politics at all. And Trump picked up a lot of those people, low information voters. So I think to win elections, and I'm not talking about the midterms, I'm talking about like 2028. To win 2028, you can't just say MAGA is bad or Trump was bad or JD Vance is bad or they're corrupt and stuff like that. Sure, you'll pick up votes by Democrats. Biden had the strongest post-COVID. Yeah, you'll pick up votes by Democrats, but if you want to get independents voted for you, if you want to get ex-Republicans voting for you, you have to give them a reason to vote for you, not just for a reason to vote against the other person, right? You have to give them a reason to vote for you. Like um, Obama had Obamacare, right? Obamacare was his big policy. And he talked about it all the time. He talked about Obamacare all the time. He debated people about it, and that was the big thing. That was his thing. It wasn't just George W. Bush is a bad person or John McCain is a bad person or, Mitt Romney is a bad person. He's like, here's some things that I want to do to make your life better, right? That's how Zoran Mandani was voted in. Zoran Mandani actually did the opposite. Zoran Mandani went to places in New York where people voted for Donald Trump And he asked them, he said, "Why did you vote for Trump?" And most of them said, "The economy." None of them said, "I like Trump. I thought he was an amazing person." They said, The economy was really bad, so we wanted to try something different." And so that's the point of it. Like, there are many people write policy. That's the yeah. Yeah, exactly. I think policy is the biggest factor. If you want to get Democrats to vote, you talk about how bad Trump is. You want to get independents to vote, you talk about policies that are going to make their life better, right? You can't just vote against Democrats are always had, the other people are really bad people. That's not a reason why people vote. That's not the number one reason. People vote based on how you're going to make their life better. Economically, how you're going to make their life better. That's the number one reason. Now, it is true, Bob, that the economy under Biden was the best in the world in inflation. However, inflation doesn't mean that prices go back, right? But that prices go back to what they were before COVID. It just means they stop going up at a higher rate. So even though in America, post-COVID inflation, um, it still went up a lot. It just slowed down more than it did in other countries. But that's a very hard story to sell to people when home prices are going up, rents are going up, everything's going up, and then Joe Biden goes, yeah, but we're doing better than other countries. For people who are struggling, that doesn't help them. And then you have someone else, right? Then you have someone else who comes and says, the economy's crap, I can fix it. Well, people took a gamble with that. So I just think that at the end of the day, Joe Biden, Kamala Harris was, I think, voted out mostly because of inflation. Trump lied about it. Inflation was under 3% when Biden left. Yeah, but Bob, that doesn't mean that, but it does. So inflation is accumulative, right? So it's 3% when he left, but all the inflation that happened before, and again, I'm not blaming Joe. Post-COVID inflation affected the whole planet because it was a COVID thing, but there would be all the inflation that happened before it was already there, right? So prices had already gone up. It's just that prices were going up at a lower rate when Joe Biden left. It doesn't stop all the inflation that happened before. It didn't go back to pre-COVID times, right? It was still way higher. So inflation was going like this, and wages were going like this, right? And that's to some degree still the same. So, again, you know, Democrats are not going to get out of this. There is an issue, I think, incumbency problem that's happening around the world as well. I think the Democrats need to really. I think the reason why Graham Platner has all this stuff against him and he's still doing okay is because he's talking about the cost of living. If Graham Platner was a moderate who wasn't talking about the economy, I don't think Graham Platner, I think his polling numbers would be in the toilet, right? But the fact that he's like a populist and he's talking about healthcare and he's talking about all this, that's what's getting him around all the other stuff, right? Because what will happen is that people who support Graham Platner will say, oh no, this is happening because the establishment hate him, right? The establishment are coming after him, right? And so then yeah, and exactly. This is the Trump type. I'm not saying Graham Platner's Trump, but there is something that Trump that people are picking up on is the more people attack Trump, the more he became the outsider. The more the establishment in the Republican Party attacked Trump, the more he became the outsider, right? And the more popular he became. Because something has happened in politics over the last 10 or so years. People don't care as much whether you're Republican or Democrat. They like people like outsiders now. They like independents, right? They like people who are different. Donald Trump became popular in 2016, the primaries, by attacking all his own people like they were his enemies. The way he went after other Republicans was brutal. And that made him out. It's almost like you had an independent running within the Republican Party. That's how brutal he was, right? And so people loved that. They loved the fact that he wasn't part of the establishment. Fast forward to Zoran Mandani in New York, right? The same thing. all the establishment Democrats went after Zoran Mandani. What did that do? It made him the outsider. He became more popular again. Every time they criticized him, his popularity went up. He was kind of like an independent within the Democratic Party. And this is the same with Graham Platner. Graham Platner, even though he's a Democrat, is seen as an independent within the Democratic Party. And the more he's attacked by the establishment, the more popular he'll become. So there is this kind of Donald Trump. I'm not saying that they're all they're not Donald Trump, but the tactics, not the tactics, but the way people look at them is similar, right? No, if no scandal with Mandam, yeah, exactly, yeah. If Donald Trump, if Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries are putting their arms around you, there's going to be a lot of progressive people who are like, he's not that interesting to me. Why is Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries putting their arms around this candidate? It's like, no, this guy's too safe. He's too mod. You know what I mean? They lose a bit of their appeal. And I'm talking about amongst the base. And I'm talking about amongst younger people, right? Amongst young people. And they're hyper-focused on the economy. They're hyper-focused on cost of living. They're hyper-focused on whether they can afford to buy a home, rent prices, all that sort of, that's the stuff that they're thinking about all the time. And so when people criticize Graham Platner, they're like, well, okay, but he's the only person talking about the stuff that matters to me. So, I'd rather vote for him than Janet Mills, who's like, none of her policies are going to help me. She's like a moderate Democrat. You know what I mean? So I can see why, and again, so I think there's a lot of these people. So a lot of these people, I think, so there's a lot of this stuff. So the thing is that to get the base rolled up in the Democratic Party or the Republican Party, you have to be an outsider. However, Schumer and Jeffries aren't focused on the economy. No, they're not. But the thing is that they're Schumer and Jeffries, because they're like moderate Democrats, they're not going to say something like healthcare for all because they don't believe in that, right? Or their policies are going to be more tweaking around the sides stuff, right? Yeah. It's not going to be anything major, right? So, because they don't believe in that stuff. So, people want to hear someone say something radical. I don't mean like radical as in like stupid. I mean like radical as in a radical policy, something that not tweaking around the edges. And by the way, the thing is in America is this isn't just a Trump thing, and this is not just an American thing. I think the worst mistake you can make is that this is all about Trump. It's actually not all about Trump. Trump is a symptom. Trump rode the wave of a populist movement that was already there. If you get rid of Trump, the populist movement will still be there. It'll just be a different leader. Now, it helps that Trump was charismatic and all that, but this is happening all around the world. This is not a Trump thing. You can't get rid of Trump and fix this up. Yes, do this shit. You can't get rid of Trump and everything goes back to normal. I guarantee you it won't go back to normal. Have a look around the world, right? In the United Kingdom right now, remember, there's a lot of whenever something happens in one Western country, it almost always happens around the world, including America, right? In the England at the moment, the United Kingdom, the number one party there now, I agree, Joe, need major change. The number one party there now is a guy called Nigel Farage, a far right wing guy called the Farone Party, and that particular person is coming number one in the polls, right? In Australia, in the last 6 months, for the last 30 years, there's been a political party in Australia called One Nation, and it's run by a woman called Pauline Hanson, who struggles to put a sentence together. I'm all about playing, yeah. And Pauline Hanson has been in politics in Australia since the 90s, and she's always been about immigration. In the 90s, she became notorious for saying things like Asian invasion, meaning there's too many Asians coming into Australia, right? She's all about immigrants, and she's like a right-wing MAGA Trump type populist, right? But she's only ever held about 10% of the vote, meaning she only got about 10% of the vote. So she was always more like one or two seats. She didn't have any control, right? However, in the last 6 months, she has now she is now the second most popular party in Australia after the centre left party. Her party, One Nation, has eaten up the centre right party, which is called the LNP, basically taken all its voters and they've gone over to her. So there's basically no centre right party anymore. It's the centre left party and a far right wing party. This is not a Donald Trump thing. This is not a UK thing. This is not an Australian. This is a worldwide thing that's happening in almost every Western country. So you need to get rid of the illusion that if you get rid of Trump, this stop. It doesn't. Trump is just riding the wave of something that's been happening for a while. And so you have to acknowledge the fact that what's going on underneath for something like this to happen. And what you're finding is that the reason why all these people are flirting with far right wing parties all around the world is because of the economy, because of inflation, because of cost of living, and a lot of these people are either older people, right? They're older people who weren't very successful. A lot of them are working class people. A lot of the people didn't quite, their life didn't quite go the way they thought it would, right? Things got harder and harder for them, right? Some of these people don't own homes. They've been renting their whole life. So they haven't accumulated wealth through owning homes. And by the time they wanted to buy a home, it was too expensive to buy a home. So they were kind of, you can call them, they were kind of left behind, right? And so these people exist in Australia, America, the UK, Europe, Scandinavia, everywhere. And these people have, for decades, tried centre-left parties and then centre-right parties, centre-left parties and centre-right parties. And nothing changed, right? They tried both of the major parties in each country. Nothing changed. So what they started going is, well, I need to do something different. And so what happened is you had these other minor parties, smaller parties, right, go, well, why don't you try us? You've tried centre left and centre right all these years and it's not working. And so that's what's happened. People are now, a lot of people will say it's racism or this and that. It's actually, some of that is true, remember, you have to remember, most of these people were not voting for these people 10 years ago, right? So people didn't just suddenly become more racist in the last 5 or 10 years. It's economics, right? Not to say there aren't racists in that group, but the racists were already part of that group. The new people who were joining those groups is not about racism. It's about the economy. And until people realize that that's the reason behind this, and not say racism or gender and stuff like that, because then it's not the main reasons. You're never going to be able to fix the problem where people will go to far extreme parties to try to fix something because they're rolling the dice. In America, have to go, thanks, Kimmy. In America, the Trump took over the MAGA party. Trump took over the MAGA party in America. What about gay? Well, it's not about, yeah, Donna, it's not about, this is not about gay. This is not identity politics. Yeah, the reason what's happening around the world has got nothing to do with identity. Oh, it's got a little bit, but that's not the main reason. It's not about gays. It's not about straight. It's not about this. It's not about that. It's about economic conditions, right? And 100% is the number one focus. 100%. It's economic conditions. And until you realize that that's the number one thing that's going on behind, and major parties like the centre left in America try to address those, and I think they are. I think they are. I think they are trying to address those problems, but those problems aren't that easy to address. It's more nuanced than that. I don't think so, Bob. Nuance in the sense of yes, there are there are people who taking advantage of that. For example, in the UK, Nigel Farage will take advantage of that because they blame immigrants, right? So a lot of the leaders in these parties will blame immigrants. And the people in the parties who might not have thought anything about immigrants in the past, they might start thinking, okay, maybe it is immigrants, right? Because in the United Kingdom, there was more immigrants came into the country. In America, under Biden, there was a little bit of chaos at the border. In Europe, there was a lot of people who were coming in because of the war in Syria. A lot of people opened it up. And so it was an easy, so they saw that, and the far right wing parties said, okay, we've had this influx of immigrants come in, let's blame them. And then you have people who were not normally blaming immigrants suddenly going, well, you know, I'm not against immigration, but we don't have enough this, we don't have enough houses, we don't have enough this and stuff like that. So they took advantage of that. But these people would always, they never thought like this before. These are people who are coming across, right, from centre left parties, centre right parties, and they're moving over to those parties. So these are not people that have been inside these parties for 10 or 20 years, and it's happening all around the world, right? Economics is the biggest factor that's affecting these things. People have said over and over again, we've tried centre left, we've tried centre right, and now they're going to try something else, right? Because they thought it wasn't working for them. So I think, I think the parties have to address, and that's why someone like Graham Platner, who years and years ago, right, years and years ago, someone like Graham Platner would have been like, he wouldn't have had a chance in hell. No one would have taken him seriously with that. Now, nobody would take. But he's being taken seriously now because his policies are populist policies, right? And again, people don't care as much about character, right? There's a lot of people who voted for Trump who didn't like his character, but they've held their nose and voted for him because they thought he was best on the economy. A lot of people in my country hated Pauline Hanson, the One Nation person. However, the number one reason that people are saying in polls why they moved over to her was because of cost of living. The number one reason they're moving to is cost of living. It's not racism. People didn't suddenly become racist in 6 months, right? People didn't suddenly become this or that. Now remember, she's a female. The person who runs our far right wing party is a female. So it's obviously not gender. So again, a lot of this stuff, and by the way, her second in charge is a gay man, a very popular, a gay man. So again, she's far right, female, and her second most popular person in the party is an openly gay person. So it's not about, those aren't the number one things. I think Democrats too often go to, Trump fucked up the economy in his first term. I don't buy that people voted for him because they thought it would be fixed already. Bob, all I'm saying, Bob, is it's based on all the polling. Every single poll that they did after he won the election by a billion miles showed that the economy was the number one reason they voted for him by a gigantic margin. Next was immigration. And often voters might have voted for Trump because of the economy and look at all crap we got in addition to economy. As a result, yes, the economy, but voters need to be concerned about illegal wars, war crimes, particularly pedophiles, Republican Party that labelled them as the enemy. Yeah, look, and Dave, I don't disagree with that. And I think obviously things like the war in Iran are a big factor. But I actually don't think the war in Iran is a big factor because we're bombing another country. Now, I'm not saying obviously that's a factor. Obviously, that's a factor. I think the reason people hate the war in Iran in America and around the world is because how it's affecting the economy. So many times when people on the Republican side or independents talk about the war in Iran, they often bring it back to, I'm paying too much for gas. I'm paying too much, there's farmers paying too much for fertilizer. So it all comes back to economics, right? What the number one reason why people say they don't like the war in Iran is because it's affecting them economically. Okay, so you've got to separate. Yeah, I wish people could see him for the film. Yeah, and again, I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that. Trump obviously lies to people, right? But there's no doubt there's no doubt that that the number one the problem is a lot of people don't pay attention to politics, right? And I think sometimes people who do pay attention to politics, like we do here, they often just assume that everyone else is paying attention to politics. When the fact of the matter is, most people in America do not pay attention to politics. They will just get a little bit here and a little bit there, right? And independents, which are the biggest voting bloc that decides elections, are the least likely to pay attention to politics. And so they vote on economics by a billion miles. In 2024, in 2024, all around the world, there has never been a year like 2024. Incumbent governments all around the world were kicked out in record numbers. There has never been a year in modern times, right? America, Europe, Scandinavia, South America, countries all around the world, incumbent governments were kicked out at record levels. Didn't matter whether you're left wing, right wing, centrist, whatever. And the number one reason why people around the world gave for kicking those parties out is because of post-COVID inflation. Post-COVID inflation affected all countries, Western countries. And the number one reason why political parties were being kicked out, they don't pay attention to politics, but they notice the corruption, people being kidnapped off our streets. Well, I think a lot of independents think that both sides or all politicians are corrupt. I really do. I think that's how they think. Because if you don't pay attention to politics, they will see something that, they'll go, oh, Hunter Biden sold all these paintings. Oh, Hunter Biden was at Burisma. They're not, I don't think people realize is they just think both sides. Now, I do believe people now, after Trump got into power the second time, I do believe people think that Trump is more corrupt. I do believe that. And I do think that's becoming a bigger issue. I do believe that. I do think the ICE is becoming the issue as well. But again, I think a lot of those things became issues because Trump, because the economy wasn't fixed, right? The economy wasn't fixed. Trump lied. Trump lied about the economy. Trump said he was going to get inflation down. So Trump gets into power. The economy doesn't get better. Inflation doesn't get better. Then he starts a war. Then he starts a war with Iran after he said he's not going to start any new wars. And then what happens? Gas goes up. Fertilizer goes up. So so then again, it's like everything goes back. A lot of the stuff goes back to the economy, right? And of course, there's going to be people, for example, Hispanic voters who don't like what he's doing with ICE. There's no doubt about that, right? Because he went way too far. They wanted, a lot of people, independents, they wanted less chaos on the border, but they didn't want Trump's cruelty to do with ICE, right? They were somewhere in the middle, right? And the tariffs. Yeah, exactly. And the tariffs. Yeah. But yeah. And again, so I think a lot of this stuff is economy. And then a lot of the other stuff, I'm not saying isn't important, but it's not the main reason. If the economy is going gangbusters, I guarantee you there will be so many people who will turn a blind eye to the other stuff, right? But the economy is not going gangbusters. It's going the opposite to that. And so therefore, once you fall out of love with someone, or once you see that they're liars, then you start looking at other stuff they do. The Epstein files, right? ICE, overreaching, right? And they start looking at the whole thing, and then suddenly it's like, oh, corruption, the slush funds, right? But it all starts with the economy not working. Because remember, Trump was pretty bad before he was elected the second time, and he was still voted in. In fact, he was voted in with a bigger margin because people turned their blind eye because they thought he was going to come in and help the economy. And they saw some chaos on the border and stuff like that. So I think the biggest thing that the Democrats should do in 2028 is focus on the economy. In my opinion, I think they should hyper focus on the economy, hyper focus on cost of living, housing, healthcare, all that sort of stuff, right? Leave character like other, whatever else you want to say. I mean, obviously, I don't think Trump's going to be there in 2028. But so I guess it depends on who else they go. Like if they go against JD Vance, obviously I think that's a pretty good result for Democrats because they can basically say if the economy was great right now, people excuse all the rest of the shit. They're still part of the problem. Yeah, but but again, I think that's the case in but I think that was the case in the first time they voted for him, and the second time they voted for him. I just think that I think a lot of people they don't vote. They don't vote because I think part of the problem is, Bob, is that they're not listening to what the stuff that you're listening to or I'm listening to. They're not hearing that stuff. They're not engaged with news every day, right? They're only engaged with news on the peripherals, right? They're spending most of their days working or kids or whatever. They're not reading the news. It is so much easier these days to be off the news. You've got TikTok videos, you've got streaming services, right? You've got all this other stuff that you can make yourself busy with outside outside of the outside of politics. What is the evidence that Trump ever did anything good for the economy? Well, again, I don't think there is. But what it was is that when Trump first came into power, Barack Obama left a pretty decent economy for Trump, right? He left a pretty decent economy. So when Trump came into power, he just took over an economy that was already doing okay, right? It wasn't because of him. It was because the economy was already, Barack Obama had turned, remember the global financial crisis, which happened at the end of George W. Bush's term, in 8 years, Barack Obama had to turn that financial crisis into a decent economy, and he did that. So Trump inherited a good economy from Barack Obama and then took credit for it. That's what happened. And then COVID came around and then went, well, it was because of COVID, right? So he just inherited a decent economy. Now, again, I agree, Joe, but because those people are disengaged, they are part of it. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. So people, and again, it's because Trump, Trump will just repeat things over and over again. I had the best economy. I had the best this. I had the best that. And because the economy before COVID wasn't in the trash bin, wasn't horrible, then he tries to pretend like it was the best economy in the world. But in fact, all he did was inherit a good economy from Barack Obama. But again, Trump, what Trump was good at is selling himself or lying or exaggerating everything, right? So again, I just think it's one of those things where, he didn't do it. But after COVID, the economy did go down, but it wasn't because of Joe Biden. It was because of COVID, post-COVID inflation. Trump claims the economy is good now. Yeah. And but the thing is, Dave, no one's believing that. So it works both ways. At the end of 2024, Joe Biden was trying to say a similar thing. And he inherited a good economy from Biden and totally, yeah. Yeah, look, I'm a little bit less, Bob, I'm a little bit less saying that it was a good economy. Again, I'm not blaming Joe Biden, but inflation was still up. Cost of living was still up, right? It's not Joe Biden's fault because it's not that easy to bring it down. So I think post-COVID, everything seemed to go up a lot. Rent seemed to go up. House prices seemed to go up. Healthcare, a lot of things seemed to go up, right? And I don't think it mattered whether it was Joe Biden or Barack Obama. He did the best he could, but people were still, inflation had still gone up. It hadn't gone back, right? So I wouldn't say it was a good economy. I would say he did the best he could. But the reality is that sometimes the economy is not just up to the president of the United States. A lot of the reasons why the economy was going bad was because post COVID, a lot of things changed, right? People were able to work from home. people weren't going into the cities anymore. Rents went up because people didn't like living with flatmates, so they decided to live on their own. So therefore, there's a whole complicated reasons why things went up, and I don't think I wouldn't say the economy was good. I would say the economy was as good as could be considering the situation. But I think there was a lot of people uh, who who voted, who voted. I think there is something going on outside of Trump. That's all I'm saying. There is something going on outside of Trump, and to just make it about Trump, I think people are going to see a situation where the Democrats get in. Let's assume Democrats get in 2028. Inflation, the similar problems, still a housing problem, right? Houses are too expensive, rents are too expensive, this is too expensive, that's too expensive, right? It's not just going to come down like that, right? And so what's going to happen is if Democrats get in and it doesn't fix up, these independents will start blaming the Democrats. They just blame whoever the incumbents are, right? And that's not just happening in America, it's happening in Australia, the UK, Europe. Incumbency is become really toxic. Being the incumbent government, everything that goes wrong, um, the incumbent government. And there is some stuff with the economy. Obviously, Trump is making things worse, right? Trump is making things 100 times worse because the war in Iran, all that stuff, tariffs, all that stuff. But the truth of the matter is, had Kamala Harris been elected, a lot of the structural problems would still been there. House prices still would have been expensive. They blame the Democrats now. Yeah, a lot of stuff. So even though Trump made it a lot worse, there still would have been issues in the economy, right? I just get it just because you look at house prices in America, you look at rent prices, and you look at wages, and they're going like this, and the wages are going like this, and that's all around the world. And wages can't keep up with the cost of living. And so that happened under Biden, and it's now happening under Trump. It's getting worse because of stuff that he's doing. But even without Trump, those problems still exist because they exist in Australia without Trump. They exist in Europe without Trump. They exist in Scandinavia without Trump. There is something going on underneath that can't just be blamed on any particular party. And so a party needs to come in and address those things to stop this roller coaster of going back and forwards between each party, right? Because the independents, they they want they want to see the economy. Otherwise, what you're going to do is you're going to get another person. Actually, the best thing Republicans can do is Trump not run again. Trump has so much baggage now that he's actually the worst case scenario for the Republicans in 2028. The best case scenario for the Republicans in 2028 is a populist, right? Another populist right wing person who says all the economic things that they want to hear without all the baggage, without the Epstein files, without the war in Iran, right? All this sort of stuff, right? Imagine someone like Tucker Carlson, right? I don't like Tucker Carlson. I think he's a grifter, whatever. But someone like Tucker Carlson comes in and he says, we're going to stop all the wars, right? War in Iran, Gaza, all these sort of stuff. We need to focus on the United States. We need to focus on our own economy. Bang, 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 right? He does all that stuff. Yeah, exactly. But the funny thing is, Bob, is people will, if they feel desperate, I agree with you, Bob. I agree. It's a lot. It's not easy to, these problems aren't easy to fix up. They're not, I don't think they're just like, I don't think anyone can just come in and fix them up. And I think that's the problem. And so people are just gravitating towards who's ever telling them what they want to hear. The whole idea of populism comes from just telling people what they want to hear, right? You tell people what they want to hear. The problem with not being a populist is that maybe you might have the right idea, but your idea doesn't sound like it's going to do much, right? And therefore, populism will always win out when things aren't going great. And that's happening in the UK, Australia, and stuff like that. So the way, in my opinion, to beat populism on the right is to have people who come in and give populist left wing policies that are based on facts. Don't just come in and say stuff that you think sounds good, right? But you don't know if it's going to work. Joe, I read because of Iran and the Strait, we're about to experience a lot worse economic, sometimes July shortages in stores. Yeah. Have you read this? No, I haven't. But it wouldn't surprise me. It wouldn't surprise me, Dave, at all. It's definitely, look, like the other day, I was on Twitter and I was talking, I don't know, I was talking to like a MAGA person on Twitter, and they looked at my account and they said, "You're an Australian. What do you care?" They said, "Oh, what do you care? You're an Australian. What do you care about what we do?" And I said, "Every time I go to fill up my car, I'm reminded of Trump, right? Like what Trump is doing in Iran isn't just affecting Americans, it's making gas prices way more expensive in Australia, fertilizer fertilizer a lot more expensive in Australia. So I don't think a lot of these MAGA Americans realize that what Trump does affects the rest of the world, not just the United States. So it's interesting because it's weird the way they think. It's like, okay, like if I was in Australia that was talking about, I don't know, Fiji, a small island off Australia. Like it's a tiny island, right? It doesn't affect anyone. And I was talking about Fiji all the time. And I was like, Fiji this and Fiji that. And they'd be like, Joe, what are you talking about? What do you care? That would be different. That would be weird, right? But America is the biggest country on the planet, the most influential country on the planet. It's the most powerful country on the planet, economically and militarily. So everything America does affects the rest of us. So it's not just an American thing, it's a rest of the world thing. So I think that's the reason a lot of MAGA people don't realize why so many people in other countries pay attention to what's happening in America. So yeah, I don't think they realize because, Trump's impact is global. Yes, it's likely to remove the cause. Exactly, Donna. Exactly. And look, it helps having a charismatic person like Trump at the helm. Absolutely. But you remove Trump at this stage, could actually be in a strange way, could actually be a positive because if you replace Trump with a similar Trump person without all the baggage, without Iran, tariffs, Epstein files, all that stuff, you just replace him. Everything else is the same, except he doesn't have all the baggage of Trump. That's a pretty winning strategy for the Republican Party because a lot of people on that side, they like the populist things that he says. It's just that he never did it. He lied about it, and he actually did the opposite. But if you have someone else in the Republican Party say the same things as Trump has and says, well, Trump came in and he lied about all that, that could be a winning strategy because people don't care as much about Republican, Democrat. They care about who's going to make my life better. And Democrats, I think, to their credit, because they did this autopsy, a 2024 autopsy, and what they realized is, which I agree with, is that Democrats focusing so much on Trump was good to get the base out, the Democratic base, because that's what they wanted, but it didn't help with independents, it didn't help with Hispanics, and it didn't help with young men. All they cared about was the economy. That was their number one factor. So, or immigration. And immigration is often tied to the economy, right? When people talk about immigration, they talk about, well, we can't, we can't afford to look after all these people. So it's always tied in with the economy, immigration. Yeah. So yeah. Anyway, guys, I have to go. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining. Thank you, Donna. Thank you, Dave. Thank you, Bob. Thank you, everyone, for joining. Not sure who else is there. Connie. Thank you, everyone. Paolo, if you're still there. I'm not sure if Sandra, if you're still there or not. But thank you, everyone. Really appreciated that. Had a good conversation. Thank you for joining. And I will see you guys. Thanks, Donna. I really appreciate that. I will see you guys soon. Thanks, Dave from California. Thank you, Connie. Really appreciate that. Thank you, guys. Thank you. Bye.